Thanks, everyone. Well, good morning, everybody. So today we're doing part 3 of our End Times series, talking about what's going on in Israel. Is this reflecting prophecy? And notice I don't have part 3 of whatever here, because I started out part 1 of 2, and then it was 2 of 3, and I'm doing 3, and I'm like, man, I can't fit in everything that I want. So I don't know yet whether we want to do a part 4 next week or get back to our study of the Gospels. If you have an opinion, let me know. We'll work through that, but one way or another, we'll finish this up. I think we've been able to talk about a lot of good stuff. So the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about an end times timeline, and to summarize that real quick, we are living right now in what we call the church age. It started in Acts chapter 2. It's going on right now. That is going to end when the rapture comes. Then there will be the tribulation, followed by the second coming of Christ, and then the millennial kingdom will follow that, followed by a new heaven and a new earth. So we've been talking a lot about that timeline, and we started out asking the question, the war in Israel that's going on right now, is this a fulfillment of the war that is prophesied about in Ezekiel chapter 38? And there's a lot of people who are saying, yes, we're seeing this fulfilled before our very eyes. And what we're seeing happen, play out all around us, is eerily similar to what Ezekiel talks about. But as we have discussed the past couple of weeks, the truth is we are not seeing the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38 before our eyes now, because we know the Bible talks about that happening at the midpoint of the tribulation, and we haven't been raptured yet. But the truth of the matter is we're not seeing it fulfilled today, but we might be seeing the beginning of this ramping up. And so we last week really grappled with the question of how do we know when the rapture is right around the corner? The Bible says nobody knows the time. It's going to be a surprise for everybody. But Jesus said to watch out for it. And Paul said, if you're paying attention, then when it happens, you won't be surprised. And so last week we talked about a couple of different ways that we can look at the times, and we can keep watch as Jesus told us to, so we would be in a position like Paul says where we won't be surprised. And so I think we need to note here, before we jump right into the prophecy again, we need to note that there is merit working through this. I think it's worth our time to be talking about these things. We're doing a lot of speculation, but this is not idle speculation. Last week, we looked at Matthew 24:42, and there Jesus said, keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. And so this is what Jesus told us to do. He said, keep watch, be looking out for this thing that's going to happen. And I think the reason is, and we talked about this last week too, probably why this has happened, why we're told to keep watch, is so that we'll take spiritual matters more seriously, because there is an end that is coming. So if we're keeping watch, then we're going to be keeping that in mind. And so let's think about this, right? Because Jesus said not only do you need to keep watch, but he also said that if you do that, you're going to be blessed. And this is pretty interesting. Let's think about this. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus begins his famous Sermon on the Mount. We worked through this, I think, last January, if memory serves me correctly. And the Sermon on the Mount kicks off with what's called the Beatitudes. And this is one of the most famous parts of the Bible. There's some quotes in there that I'm sure everybody is familiar with. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He says in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." And in the Beatitudes, Jesus says 9 times, "Blessed are," and then he gives some kind of teaching about those who are blessed. And of course, we as Christians, we're all over that part of our Bible, and we should be, right? I think it makes sense. Jesus talks about the opportunities and conditions to be blessed, and so it makes sense that we should dig into that stuff. I've never heard a single Christian in my life discourage anybody from studying the Beatitudes. And this is kind of, in many people's minds, the antithesis of doing an end-time study. I've never heard it here, but in other churches I've heard of, my pastor friends saying, people will come up to them, Pastor, you shouldn't preach on the end times. It's too deep of a subject. It's too unknown. It's not relevant for what's going on today. You need to avoid that from the pulpit and talk about other things. But the Bible suggests that we shouldn't view these two different things with different levels of validity. In the very beginning of the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 3, it says, "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near." So notice what just happened here. In this passage, John is saying that reading, studying, and meditating on the book of Revelation will bring about blessings. And when he says here, blessed is the one, he uses the exact same Greek word, the exact same sentence structure, exact same grammar that Jesus did 9 times in the Beatitudes. John presents this the very same way that Jesus did in the Beatitudes. John is saying, study these end times events and you will be blessed. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near. There is merit in doing a study like this beyond just the fact that it's interesting. This isn't just idle speculation. All right, so let's talk about the third temple here. Last week, we spent most of Sunday morning working through the history of the first temple and the second temple, and the significance of those temples on Judaism, and how Judaism completely changed after the second temple was destroyed. Because if there's no more temple, there's no more sacrifices. That was the heart of Judaism up until that point. But we said that's not the end of the temple story, because the Bible talks about a third temple, and there's a lot of prophecy that surrounds that. And there's an awful lot of interesting activity that surrounds this third temple that the Bible talks about. And so if we're keeping watch for the end times, I think this is one of the big things that we need to be looking out for. We see this temple alluded to and spoken of in Scripture a number of times. Daniel chapter 9, starting in the third sentence of verse 26 and verse 27 says this: "The end will come like a flood, war will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He's talking about the Antichrist here, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. He's talking about the tribulation here. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed and poured out on him." So right here, prophesied in the Old Testament, in the book of Daniel, we see mention of the third temple. He's talking about during the tribulation, the Antichrist is going to put an end to the sacrifices. Right now, as we said last week, there are no sacrifices happening because there is no temple, and there's other problems that we'll get back to on that, but there's no sacrifice, so there's no temple, so there's no sacrifices, and so it makes logical sense here that for the sacrifices to resume, there needs to be a temple. And also, Daniel has just said here, the Antichrist sets up this abomination that causes desolation. And we could spend like 2 Sunday mornings talking about exactly what that is. We're not even going to go down that road today. It's just too big of a rabbit trail. Can't do it in a short period of time. But just note here, Daniel said in the passage that we just read that Antichrist is going to set that up in the temple. Okay, so for Daniel's prophecy to work out, a third temple has to be rebuilt and has to have been operational for at least some period of time by the midpoint of the tribulation. And just in case you're a little bit skeptical about whether Daniel's alluding to the third temple or not, because many people have argued against this, Jesus himself confirms this interpretation. Matthew 24, verses 12 through 22, and Jesus is clearly talking about the tribulation here. He says, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. And here's verse 15. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. So here in this passage that we just read, Jesus is very clearly talking about a sign that the second half of the tribulation is about to kick off. And as bad as the first half of the tribulation is going to be, the second half apparently is a lot worse. And Jesus said, this sign that the second half of the tribulation is about to begin, he said that sign is the prophecy from Daniel 9:26 that we have just read. He says that when you see that abomination in the holy place, and he's talking about the temple, then you will know that you are at the midpoint of the tribulation. So again, we don't know exactly when the temple is going to get rebuilt, but we do see that it is going to be at least operational at the midpoint of the tribulation. If the Antichrist is going to stop the sacrifices in the temple prior to that abomination at the midpoint, the sacrifice had to have started at some point prior to the midpoint of the tribulation. I hope that makes sense. After the second temple was destroyed and the Jews were scattered, the world thought they were done, right? For almost 2,000 years, the Jews lived in just different pockets of the world. They were a scattered people, and that's how it was until 1948. When the modern nation of Israel wound up getting established. And understand the significance of this. There has never been a people group in history that was scattered for a long period of time and came back together. It's never happened. Never mind a 2,000-year gap between the time that they were scattered and they came back together. That makes it pretty much impossible without the hand of God. But the Bible said that this very thing would happen. Amos chapter 9, verses 14 to 15 says, and I will bring my people Israel back from exile. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them, says the Lord your God. Israel's back. God has said no one's going to be able to push them back out of the land again. So in 1948, either this prophecy from Amos got fulfilled, or in 1948, this began the start of the fulfillment of this prophecy from Amos. And now the Jews just need to start work on the third temple in order for us to get to the next part of what we've been talking about. And we have to understand this. The Jews right now are hard at work laying the groundwork for this to happen. And this is kind of an amazing thing. Israel is working right now on getting ready to rebuild the temple. And so if you think about this, that means they are hard at work preparing to fulfill prophecy that's detailed out in the book of Revelation, but they don't believe in the book of Revelation. They're just trying to rebuild or build the temple again to bring back the glory days. And in doing so, curiously, ironically, they're laying the foundations right now of the fulfillment of some of the most spectacular prophecy that God has given to mankind. Book of Revelation say these things are going to happen. Right? And again, Israel, they don't believe in the book of Revelation, but they're hard at work fulfilling this anyway. Do you think that's a coincidence. All right, so the third temple is a thing. I hope we've established that. This is something that's going to get built. It's prophesied that it's going to be built. And we just said the Jews are working on this right now. Last week we mentioned that on the site where the temple should be, there's actually 2 mosques and a very dicey political situation. So Israel can't start construction yet, but that doesn't mean that they're sitting back and doing nothing. If you really think about building a temple, it's a daunting task, right? This is an enormous project that needs to get done. It's not just constructing a building. There's all kinds of details. They have to plan out what they're going to build. And this isn't just build any building. This is described by God to be a certain way. And you can imagine all the people that would be involved in the rework and the attention to detail that must go into this. The temple described isn't just a building, it is a building that is full of very specific implements that God gives exacting detail about the dimensions and materials, and these are not easy things to just do a Walmart run or whatever and pick up. All of these things take time. Planning, creating, and building all of these things, this stuff takes time. And so couldn't hurt... I wouldn't be surprised if we think through this and say, well, if the temple is up and running during the tribulation, how much planning needs to happen in order for that to happen? And so the question we could be forgiven for asking, well, does this affect the imminent return of Christ? If you remember back 2 weeks ago when we talked about this doctrine of the imminent return of Christ, the Bible is full of prophecy, things that have been fulfilled, things that are going to be fulfilled. And we said the next prophecy that gets fulfilled in the Bible is going to be the rapture. There's nothing else that has to happen. Jesus can come back at any time, right? That's how we mapped things out prophetically, and I think we can be pretty comfortable with that. But then the question is, well, if the temple is up and running halfway through the tribulation, isn't that more than a 3-year project to get all that together and get that done? So does that mean, well, the creation of the temple really is the next thing? Does this affect the imminent return of Christ? And the answer there is no. Listen, we know God can do anything that he wants to according to his own time frame. Bible does not tell us when the temple gets built. It might be started in the church age, but it also can get started in the beginning of the tribulation too. Because like we said, the Jews have already started on the project. And let me just share a few of these details with you, because this is absolutely fascinating. A lot of this stuff was kept secret, but then a lot of things are being leaked out. One of the things that had been leaked about this temple is that Israel they had created blueprints for this already. Right? The architectural renderings are done. And I don't have the blueprints here, but you can see here's a diagram up in your left corner of the screen about what this is going to look like. We have a 3D rendering of the temple here in the top right. And there's also, I understand, an actual 1/50th scale model that has been built. I'm pretty sure this picture here is that. But if this is of the second temple or whatever, please forgive me. But my understanding is there is an actual 2-scale model that has already been built based off of these plans. The planning for the structure is done. This is ready to go. Also, as we mentioned, the Bible talks about the temple being filled with all kinds of implements, and Israel has been hard at work making these implements. Here's a picture of wine and water libation cups. These are the actual ones that Israel has now produced, and these are going to be fixed in the top southwest corner of the altar. So the wine libation, this gets poured out on the altar every single day. The water libation cup, that just gets poured out during the Feast of the Tabernacles, which we've been talking about recently. Here's a wine vessel that has been made for this occasion. This is also going to be used for the wine libation ceremony. And understand, this is not cheap junk here that they're producing. They didn't just get on wish.com and order a bunch of cheap stuff from China that showed up in 16 weeks or whatever. The Bible gives very exacting specifications. So all of these things are made out of pure gold, pure silver. This is painstakingly done. This particular picture, I believe, this is pure silver here. this is a big deal that these things exist because it would be kind of hard to put all this stuff together. We know priestly garments are a thing. The temple isn't just a building you look at. There's things that happen in the temple. People use these implements. But in Exodus chapter 28 and Leviticus chapter 8, the Bible gives exact specifications about uniforms that the temple priests need to be wearing when they're carrying out their duties. And these are very, very specific, even down to the type of stitching that is used. And these are very high quality garments that the priests need to wear. Well, guess what? Israel's made them and they're storing them in a warehouse now. And you can see here from these examples that they have on display in a museum, all of the pieces from Exodus 28 and Leviticus 8 are mentioned. You see wearing the turban. You can see on your left the figure there wearing the breast piece. There's the ephod that gets mentioned. That's that blue thing that the guy on your left is wearing. There's the robe. Also in this same picture, this is the incense altar that gets described in Exodus chapter 30. This is wood overlaid with pure gold. They've gone ahead, they've built this. This is ready to be put in the temple as soon as this thing has been constructed. Exodus chapter 25 talks about a table of showbread. Well, they've made this too. Here it is. Here's some other copper vessels that they have produced. They're going to be used for meal offerings in conjunction with worship in the temple. This one's interesting too. This is a picture, you probably recognize this from descriptions in the Bible. This is a picture of a 10-stringed lyre. And if you read through the Old Testament, you see this instrument is all over the Old Testament, people playing that. And this is my understanding here. I've not confirmed this beyond just one source, but from some research I was doing, this source had said, once the second temple was destroyed and the people were scattered, this instrument went away. All right, the people were to the winds, they were in all different parts of the world, and nobody played this instrument. And so for almost 2,000 years, apparently this instrument was absent from society. But guess what? Israel is building them again to use when the third temple is finally built. Probably nobody has seen anything like this in like 1900 years, but Israel's stockpiling these things now. Pretty amazing. Here's a picture of the incense chalice and a shovel for bringing coals from the outer altar to the golden incense altar. And listen, I could go on and on and on. There is a lot more stuff that Israel has prepared for the third temple. And again, they display some of these things in museums. They acknowledge it's going on, but they never really release the full picture of all the preparations that have been done, for obvious reasons. But the point here is that they're ready to go. As soon as the temple is ready to be built, when they're ready to break ground, or they are ready to break ground right now, they have a plan, they have materials, and they have some, most, or perhaps all of the implements needed to put in the building when it's done. And this is interesting too. They've also been busy training people, and this part I think is absolutely fascinating. If you remember, we touched on this last week. When the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, it wasn't just the temple that got destroyed and the people got scattered. All the genealogy records that were available at the time were destroyed as well. And so Israel kind of wound up with this problem when everybody got scattered, especially after almost 2,000 years go by. You know you're Jewish because of your family tradition, but nobody for a very long time has been able to actually prove what tribe they come from. And when you read the Old Testament and it talks about the temple and things that have to be done in the temple, it says these priestly duties have to be performed by a Levite, and not just a Levite, it has to be a Levite from the line of Aaron. And when you see some times in the Old Testament where they got away from that and somebody else did some of those responsibilities, it didn't go well for anybody involved, right? So for almost 2,000 years now, nobody's been able to know for sure whether they're from that line anymore until now. This is absolutely amazing. So apparently, there are some names that traditionally have been associated with people from the line of Aaron. And there are also some families that had this oral tradition passed down from generation to generation, where people, father told son, who told their son, who told their son, you're from the line of Aaron. And if you live in Israel, it's actually illegal to change your name to one of these names. But you've got this tradition of a group of people who mostly are confident they're from the line of Aaron, but who knows? Well, in the past couple of years, somebody did a study and they tested the genetics of these people who fit in these two different categories, and they found that with most of these people, their genes showed a common male ancestor that traces back exactly to the time of Aaron. And so for 2,000 years, nobody knew for sure, are you a potential priest for the temple or not? Now a simple DNA test will confirm the very people from the bloodline of Aaron who can do this work. It is absolutely fascinating. We've been scratching our heads how they could work this out before. Now we've got a way that this can happen. Also, this is pretty amazing too. This is a little hush-hush on the specifics, but in the past few years, Israel has actually been training temple priests in the traditional ways again. This is significant because this hasn't been happening since the temple was destroyed. There is no temple, and as we mentioned last week, in the 2nd century, Judaism changed. It shifted to this process of rabbinic Judaism because there's no temple, there's no sacrifice anymore, and so Jewish life since then has revolved around doing good deeds. But in the past few years, they're taking some of these men who are qualified to be priests and they're training them in the ways of the Torah, training them to be temple priests again. They are getting ready to bring back this old form of Judaism that has not been able to be practiced since 70 AD. Absolutely fascinating. Here's another interesting one. The red heifer, Numbers chapter 19, and without going too deep into this, it's a very important offering that revolves around cleansing and purity. And in order to make this particular offering, as per Numbers 19, a specific cow had to be sacrificed in a certain manner to make this happen. And Israel did this in the Bible. But there hasn't been a proper red heifer in Israel for about 2,000 years until now. And again, I got to caveat this because I'm probably the least qualified person in this room to talk about cattle breeding process. So please forgive me if I'm a little imprecise here. But my understanding is red cows are not an uncommon thing. Like, they're all over the place. But a red cow, in accordance with Numbers chapter 19, is. The rabbinic tradition around this says that in order for this cow to qualify, it can't have more than 2 hairs of another color on its entire body. And there's other stipulations there. And there just hasn't been one of these cows in a long time. But through genetic engineering and good breeding practices, apparently the red heifer is back. There was some evangelical ranchers in Texas, and they managed to create one or more of these things. They shipped them to Israel, and those red heifers have been accepted by the powers that be there as meeting the Numbers 19 standard. Absolutely amazing. Hasn't been around in 2,000 years, and it's ready. Sacrifice of the red heifer, not an end times prophecy, but when you look through the old ways in the Old Testament, it would make sense that one should be sacrificed in conjunction with building the 3rd temple. And for 2,000 years now, that just couldn't happen, but now it can. And listen, I can go on and on and on about this stuff, but I think we've built the case here. Jesus said to keep watch for the end times, keep watch for these things. And we've said one of the ways that we can do this is by looking at the things that are going to take place during the tribulation. And when we can suddenly start seeing a lot of these things coming into focus, like, oh, that's how this is going to happen, or oh, now this can happen, right? When we start seeing all these things come into focus, those are probably signs that we should be paying attention to. The 3rd temple plays prominently in the prophecies about the tribulation and the millennial kingdom. And since the destruction of Israel and since the destruction of the 2nd temple and the scattering of Israel, the fulfillment of these prophecies were just a matter of faith, right? Up until very recently, you'd read this stuff and you'd say, well, God said it's going to happen, so I believe it's going to happen. Even 100 years ago, think about this, just 100 years ago, you could be driving your car and thinking about Israel and the 3rd temple and the end times, and you'd be scratching your head about how this stuff could possibly come true because there hadn't been an Israel on the map for almost 2,000 years. Never mind where the 3rd temple was going to come from. But 1948 comes along, and suddenly Israel's back. And now 2023 comes along, and all the groundwork has been laid for the temple. Israel is ready to build it. Israel wants to build it. There's just this pesky problem of these two mosques sitting on the location right now where the temple needs to be built. As we talked about last week, if Israel raises these mosques, then that would probably be the start of a regional war, if not World War III itself. So here's where we come full circle back to where we started 2 weeks ago. Is the conflict in Israel right now a fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 38? And we said time and again, no, it's not. It can't be. That can't happen until the midpoint of the tribulation. But the armies that Ezekiel talks about in Ezekiel chapter 38, it's not much of a stretch to look at what the prophecy is, look at what's going on right now in the world, not much of a stretch to realize this war is probably right around the corner. And this war that's being fought now, if you think about it, of the thousands of unguided missiles fired into Israel, it would only take one falling at just the right place to destroy the mosques, and Israel could move in, seize the ground, and build the temple. Also, we have to think, if Israel is only holding back on taking these mosques because it doesn't want to start a war, if all of her enemies come at her full force tomorrow while she's defending herself, why would Israel not seize these two mosques, tear them down, and begin building the third temple, which features so prominently in the tribulation? This thing is just around the corner. So let me close out here with just a few thoughts. There's other tribulation events that were formerly a head scratcher, and they sure are coming into focus now with ways they could be fulfilled. We don't know for sure. We've talked about a lot of stuff. There's more. I couldn't fit it in today. Might cover some of that in the midweek. And again, let me know your thoughts. I could talk more about it next week, or we could be done and get back to working through the Gospels. But listen, it sure seems like all of these signs are pointing to Jesus coming back soon. Does that mean he's coming back tomorrow for sure? No. Jesus might not come back for thousands of years. He might not. We don't know exactly when this is going to happen. But while we wait, Jesus told us to keep watch. And Paul said, if we're doing that, we won't be surprised when he returns. Well, we're watching. And if we're paying attention even slightly to what's going on around us, if Jesus were to come back today or a couple of years from today, it should not be a surprise to us at all. And remember this, God didn't give us these signs just because they're interesting. He gave us these things to keep us focused. God gave us these things to keep us on our toes and to keep looking for him and not forget about the greater context of what our lives should look like. He gave us these things to help us realize that we all need to heed and share Jesus' message. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Would you bow with me in prayer? Dear Heavenly God, we thank you so very much for giving us your word, and we thank you for just how it talks all about who you are, who we are, what our problem is, and what you have done to bridge the gap with that problem. Thank you so much, Lord, for giving us your Son. Thank you for the cross. And we thank you also for sharing with us what's going to happen in the future. And Lord, as we struggle to work through what these prophecies mean, because they can be difficult, Lord, I just pray you would give us clarity with these things, help us to keep watch, as Jesus said, and help us, as Paul said, to not be surprised when and if this does come to pass. And God, as we work through these difficult things, and as we have worked through these difficult passages, God, if I've made any mistakes in what I've said, please bring those things to light so I don't lead anybody astray. But Lord, what we've talked about that is true and accurately interpreted and understood, God, give us wisdom from these things. Help us to be inspired to share your message with other people, because we don't know how much time we have left, and everyone needs the saving blood of Christ. Lord, we love you dearly. We ask you, please get us home safely. Bring us back next week that we can worship you again as a family. We love you and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.